construction makers.
What are we going to talk about today, Forrest?
I don't know. So I was on vacation for a little bit.
Right.
And so I wasn't really playing much Magic, but I have been playing a lot of the Bazaar. I expected to only play a little bit. Internally, between us, we've been speculating and talking about the Bazaar and following it for literal years now.
Yeah.
I think at least 2 years since we started talking about it and following its updates, and very curious to see where it was going to go.
Why don't we start off with what is the Bazaar?
Sure.
What is this game? Who did it? Who made this?
Right. The Bazaar is made by Reynad. Reynad, some of you might know, is an ex-Hearthstone pro player / streamer. And he's been working on this game with a partner. I think him and his game design partner or something like that have been working on it for 5+ years.
Yeah,
maybe 6.
Something like that.
Yeah, very long time it's been in development. And it seems like out of nowhere, suddenly it's ready and it's out and people are playing it.
Well, I know there's like a little bit of controversy with, he was talking a lot more publicly about the development of the game.
Yeah.
And then I guess he had somebody steal some ideas or something. And
yeah, claimed that some game was taking his ideas and putting it out.
Then kind of just went dark for a while and then came back with the game coming out.
Which, is always a possibility with talking about games too soon. So yeah, I've been playing a lot of that. I expected only to be playing for maybe like 6 hours, 8 hours, where I was like, yeah, I'll give this a fair shot. I don't even know how many hours I've put into it at this point. I've played it many, many times.
It seems like this particular genre tickles your pickle. So
it's not the phrase I would use, but yeah. I mean, I have probably 600 plus hours, maybe 700 in Hearthstone Battlegrounds.
What about Cookie Clicker though?
It's not even sorted the same.
What about it though?
Like, you want to talk about it?
No,
I could tear this down. We could talk about Cookie Clicker.
How many hours in Cookie Clicker?
Well, that doesn't count because that's like an idle, so I just leave it up.
Oh, right.
I actually have more hours playing Hearthstone Battlegrounds than Cookie Clicker, though.
Okay, that's good. That was a test.
Okay.
You passed.
All right.
Barely. F+. Before we start talking about the Bazaar, if you like our videos here, please like and subscribe. You can also leave a comment down below for us with your thoughts. Also, if you want to join our Discord, there's a link in the description below.
Back to the video.
Point your finger gun at them.
Back to the video. Boom. Boom. Back. So, yes, I love auto battlers personally. Yeah. You are not as big a fan.
I think they're fine. To me, it feels like half a game, but that's coming from.
If I say you're not a fan, you go, I think they're fine, but they're barely a game.
No, that's not what I mean. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that, like, to me, it feels like I'm only kind of getting half of the full experience of doing something like drafting Magic, right? Where I'm getting the drafting half of Magic, but I'm not getting the same kind of play fulfillment out of it.
Sure.
And there's, I think that's fine. It's an experience that I want sometimes. Hearthstone Battlegrounds, I've played quite a bit. I've not been into it as much as you have, but there's definitely the optimization, right? The genre is about optimizing your sort of machine and then watching it be executed, right? Like watching the machine do the thing that you built it to do. So yeah, I think what was kind of weird about the Bazaar is, like, I think out of the gate, there was sort of talk about it being a TCG and then talk about it being, I don't know, something else. It was, I think Reynad was coming out of the gate saying, hey, I want to make my own, Battle or Hearthstone or my own TCG or something like that. Because he is a TCG player. He's played Magic. He's played Hearthstone. He's played, other stuff. And he's also a streamer. So I think somewhere along the way, this became, it started leaning in this more auto battler direction.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't know what was going on the inside and how, what they were working on, what the
all we were privy to was what anybody else could watch on YouTube or something.
Right.
Yeah.
And so from the outside perspective, it did look very much like, they were passionate about the game that they were playing. They disagreed maybe with some of the decisions. They wanted to go and make their own game. It's something that we encourage a bunch of people that watch our videos to go and do all the time. And he did it. And I think so far it seems like it's going pretty well, the overall results. But yeah, it does seem like it wasn't so much a clear direction of like, I have this exact game I want to make, as much as it was, I want to make a good game.
Right.
And that can be sort of a dangerous path to go down sometimes, because there isn't a whole lot of clarity with decision making, right?
Yeah, when you don't have a really clear driving principle other than I want the game to be good, you can end up in problematic territory. We're going to talk about the Bazaar. We're going to talk about it through the meat method. This is something that we have a video on our channel about previously that's talking about our sort of 4 categories of analysis of the game, which is marketing, experience, analysis, and takeaways, meaning that marketing is like sort of your initial first impression of the game. Experience is whether or not the game pays off on that sort of promise they sold in the marketing category. Analysis is if there's a lot more sort of meat on the bone there to dig into as you're playing the game. And then takeaways are like sort of the game's lasting appeal. Does it stay in your mind? Are you thinking about it when you're not playing it? Right. So why don't we talk about first, walk us through. I haven't really played the Bazaar.
Right, you haven't played. So this is going to be sort of, I've played quite a bit, you have not played, so you can really speak on a different level as far as the marketing aspect.
Right, like what am I, I'm sort of almost audience insert here saying this is what the game is like telling to me, and then you can sort of say, does it actually pay that
right.
off?
Yeah.
And then, of course, we can analyze things in terms of game design. We know the genre, we know like some of the pitfalls here to look out for in terms of drafting, those kinds of things. So we'll talk about some of that stuff later. But why don't you walk us through just sort of the main gameplay loop of the Bazaar?
So when you load up the Bazaar, you initially get to pick a hero, and you sign up for either ranked or normal free play or whatever. So you pick your hero, start the game, you get to pick one of 3 items that are given to you. And you start technically what's called a day at the Bazaar. During a day, you have 6 hours, and those are essentially random events. So you get, I think
6 random events per
day? I
think
day? Maybe 5. Yeah, 5 or 6 random events. Okay. And then at the top of every day, or at the end of those hours, you will face off against a player.
Okay, what are the random events?
Random events can be anything like you could fight monsters, you could end up helping people go through mountains or something like that.
And these things give you items.
And these things will give you items, buffs, currency, so you have gold to buy the things. You also get income, which is like gold that you get at the top of every day. All sorts of different things. And skills. Skills are like passive abilities.
Okay, so you're going through this day, you're buying your items, you have a specific place where the items go, and you can only have so many items in that area. Each item takes up different amounts of space based on its power level, I'm assuming. And then you also have little like trait upgrade things that you can get. They go on like the bottom of the screen, right?
Right, yeah.
Okay, and then when you go to fight somebody, how does that work?
So when you go to fight someone, it essentially is just, it's cooldown timers, the game, right? It's watching these things play out. Sometimes the things are very direct, where it's every 4 seconds, you'll have a dagger that hits someone for however much damage.
And you're just going against like one other opponent.
And you're going against one other opponent.
Their items are doing the same thing to you, basically, right? And just sort of back and forth watching these timers go down.
Yeah.
And then the damage or healing or whatever the item does happens just automatically, and you're just watching the machine that you built unfold. Okay.
And which is pretty common for auto battlers. But the difference here is that this one, after about, I don't know, I want to say 15 seconds maybe is how long it takes. You start seeing a timer show up that a sandstorm is going to come in. And what it means is that after, I think maybe being in the game for about 30 seconds, a sandstorm will start blowing in that slowly deals more and more damage. And then whoever ends up dying first loses.
Right. Okay, so there's sort of some time pressure to like keep the game moving forward.
That way it's not going on infinitely forever.
Right, because like if both players were just playing like builds that healed a lot and didn't do very much damage, you could just be stuck in an infinite loop.
Right. It's kind of similar. It's similar philosophy, I think, to having like the void or whatever in like a battlegrounds, or not a battle like a battle royale.
Yeah, right. Okay, so the main point of interaction then in the game is the purchasing of items, choosing what's like in your inventory, making like items that have synergy or obtaining items that have synergies with other items.
Yeah.
And then does the order in which you put them on your bar matter?
Sometimes it does, yeah. So
Not in combat though, right? It's just in the item buffs, or
what do you mean not in combat?
like when you're fighting another player, the order of the items in your bar?
Right, it doesn't go like left to right.
Right, because like Battlegrounds, you've got like, the first one attacks and then it goes down the line.
And super auto pets, I think, is the same sort of way. I think it's like goes down the line or something like that.
Right, where here it's just timers of items, and then whatever timer ends first does the ability first.
Right. But there's different like order or placement matters effects. Like, the item to the left of this will get this buff or
on
something.
the items themselves. So there's a way for you to sort of like, I'm going to have this item buff this other item because it's next to it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, based off your initial impressions, having not played the game, what do you picture as being the marketing for this game?
Right.
What is the fantasy that you believe is being promised by looking at what is marketed to you? So
all I've really been exposed to was Raynad talking about the game, and then the sort of intro video, which feels like kind of a wacky, like, League of Legends-esque, Hearthstone-esque thing that has it's a bazaar, right? That's the conceit, right? Is that you are, I guess, a merchant in this bazaar, and you are buying things, and you're using those things to battle each other, I guess. There's already a weird disconnect for me at this stage.
Yeah.
Where I don't really know what fantasy is being created and then fulfilled, but, we'll get to that in sort of the experience category, I guess. But, my initial impressions were just, all right, there's just stuff here, and the main sell is the mechanics. Right.
Yeah, I think this is something that we've kind of talked about for a long time when watching development progress on the game. Is something that stuck out to us is like, the idea of this being a card game that takes place in a bazaar, we think is very unique. It's good. It helps it stand out. We talked about this, when you and I have discussed like what Altered is trying to do for its card game and how it's trying to sort of tell a different narrative.
It's less combat
overall.
Focused,
right?
Theoretically,
and I think that's really admirable. But I do think that when I'm telling someone like it's this game where you buy a bunch of items in a bazaar. It's called the Bazaar. I think there's a different type of an idea of what that game is going to play like versus what the actual experience is, because you're right. It's just you're buying these items and then you're battling each other.
Right. Like my expectations, if like it's a game about a bazaar, is that I'm a merchant and I'm buying and selling and trading things, and I'm winning, I guess, by getting the most money or something.
Yeah,
like
usually
ultimately I'm the baron that runs the bazaar or something, right?
Right.
And that's not the case here. And so, I guess that was sort of my initial, I don't know if your initial marketing impressions were any different than that, but.
No, very similar. It's a little strange to be this merchant and be talking about being the merchant, but then you're beating the shit out of all the other merchants at the
with
market.
Like your random items.
Right, with a yo-yo and an ice cream truck. But... So, like, there was definitely a mismatch there. I think beyond that, though, like, looking at the actual... I think the really standout thing with this that really took me by surprise over the course of its development is that this is some of the best art that I've seen for... I mean, I guess I'd consider... Is this indie? I mean, they must have investors involved.
Yeah, there's got to be something like going on.
Yeah, maybe closer to like a AA sort of...
I don't know. For me, like, I know that we have sort of different perspectives on... Not totally on art, but like for me, I look at the art and I'm like, this looks very generic to me. And I don't think like the level of polish to me doesn't necessarily say like, oh, this art is good. But I do think that is at the forefront of the marketing for them. I think most people can look at this and go, oh, this art looks good. Right. Where I'm like, okay, you could look at something like Bellatra or whatever, and I'm like, oh, this looks great. Like it's more about sort of the cohesiveness and the, having the entirety of the game experience feel like it's within the art direction is all there for all of it, right? For me, I don't necessarily judge it based on like artistic execution,
right? Yeah,
I guess.
I think I'm in the same boat as you, and I think that's kind of what I mean is like I think when we first started seeing the game being played out, I think that we kind of talked about when there's a lot of other games that came out after Hearthstone. came out that were basically just trying to look like Hearthstone. Like the board looks the exact same. It's all oval shaped cards, or at the very least it's like similar sized cards on the board. And you could look at that game in a screenshot and be like, oh, is this Hearthstone? I think the Bazaar does a good job of like getting that same sort of like level of execution and its art and its quality of, I'd say, closer to a AAA game. But it does have just enough uniqueness that I don't think it would be necessarily mistaken for something like Hearthstone.
Let's get into the experience. So
yes.
The marketing is basically saying, you're a merchant, you're coming to this bazaar, you're buying items, and you're battling with them. So
right. you start the experience basically not knowing, right, based off of what we go off of with the meat method, right, is a lot of the times is that you're given the promise of something, assuming you aren't starting this game by watching like a streamer, because if you're watching a streamer, you immediately know kind of what the initial experience is going to be. But right. if you don't know what that initial experience is going to be, you're just seeing the marketing for it.
I will say the sort of streamer experience, to me, it feels like that's very intentional, right? To me, this feels like a game that's designed by a streamer for streaming, where that might just be the part of the marketing, that just might be part of the marketing category for them, is that they expect that to be the way that people are introduced to the game, where they're going to see a streamer playing it and then they're going to want to play it.
Which has been very successful so far.
Right. And if that's the case, you can kind of skip past the stuff that we're talking about, and which might be a good allocation of resources. Like, to be clear, none of this, we're not being judgmental or prescriptive on any of this, whether this is good or bad. It's like, okay, well, they may have recognized something here, which is that if you build a game for streaming, that's your marketing, right? The marketing is already in the experience. You don't need to worry about the whole lead up thing. Right. You can just get people playing it, and that's how they're going to be exposed to it.
Right. And so far that seems to be panning out for them really well. I've been watching a lot of Kriparian play, Raren play it, and it seems like they've gotten a lot of streamers on board.
Right, and their Twitch numbers have done well. It's hard to know, how much that is grassroots or promotion or whatever. We don't know. But the numbers on Twitch are good.
Right. But yeah, I mean, if you were to not see it that way, right, I do think that there is going to be a misalignment probably with what your expectations are. And we've kind of talked, I think we talked about this in the meat method video that we have, where that's not always a bad thing. Sometimes you can have expectations of a game and then it ends up being something else. But sometimes that something else is just more engaging to what you find interesting. If it's too much of subverting like what your expectations are, then it can feel a little bit jarring, and you could feel like it's a bummer or a letdown because you were expecting something different. But otherwise, like if you understand going into this that this is an auto battler, even that might just be enough for you to look past, some of the initial marketing. There
is sort of a built-in play experience for auto battlers that this pays off in the same way that, Teamfight Tactics or Hearthstone Battlegrounds is sort of drafting and refining your team and then watching them do their thing. Yeah. It is a genre at this point that can be leaned on.
Yeah, I mean, I think initial experience, like we kind of said, it definitely does not quite align with what I think the expectations of the marketing is, but it's tough because, yeah, if I saw a streamer playing this and I see auto battler, and I am a fan of auto battlers, or I have some expectations of it,
it pays that off.
I think it pays it off immensely. In fact, I think this might be like one of my favorite auto battlers now. I like a lot that it's doing. But if I saw it without those, my expectations, I think, would be subverted quite a lot. And I think auto battlers in like themselves are kind of a bit more of a niche genre.
We touched a little bit on the fact that I think auto battlers in general as a genre have sort of their popularity has increased due to streaming. So I think them recognizing that, like, oh, well, we don't necessarily need to have a huge marketing campaign. Let's focus on streaming. Let's focus on getting this game in front of people. They're seeing the experience, even though the setting and the thing you're doing is sort of at odds. Like the Ludo narrative here is not particularly good, but that doesn't really matter when the game is about optimization, and you're going to experience it through watching somebody play it. So you're going to see the experience directly. You don't have to sort of infer the experience through the marketing. Let's start moving into the analysis part of this, which is talking more about whether or not the game pays off past the initial stages of strategy, where you're sort of presented at the beginning of your run with a particular direction of a build based on random items that show up for you, and then at some point there theoretically is a pivot point in your build where like this initial strategy doesn't really work anymore, and now I need to change things and continue to optimize. And especially for like optimization games in general, part of the payoff mechanically is like almost infinite optimization. So if the run like ends at a certain point, right?
Yeah, if you win 10 times or whatever against players, then
right. And that it's a little bit of a hedge against like making something that's broken. Like, okay, well, if you happen to get the broken build, you only get to win 10 times, and then it is retired or whatever. But yeah, how have you found the sort of analysis part of this? The stages past the initial experience.
I think at first I was a little concerned because I think playing the initial hero, it felt a little bit like maybe there's just kind of one best build, and if you don't run into those things, then you're kind of screwed. And I think at times it can still feel like that like I think unlike some other auto battlers that I've played, that I think sort of chunk that information or maybe hedge against that variance a little bit more and start offering you some like better things, or maybe things that like it detects or things that might be helpful to you. I think that it has such a wide variety of items at its disposal that at times it can just kind of feel like, oh, okay, well, I just didn't get like the thing or whatever. And
it just never showed up.
And it never showed up. And there's like certain items that I think are just like not good later on, which is fine, right? They serve a purpose. I think that's even a problem with tabletop deck building games, right? Is like having I guess draft chaff, you could refer to it as stuff that's just not useful later in the game, but you still run into it.
Yeah, that's part of like the optimization cycle, right? You're not going to start out with the best items possible. You're going to get some that sort of fill the void and put you in a particular direction, and then you replace them with better stuff later. So one thing that came to mind for me, in a lot of auto battlers, you're sort of in a lobby with 8 other people, and you're sort of going against those other people in repetition. And there's sort of some counter drafting that can happen because you're going against those particular other people. Like maybe you have something that like, oh, well, my guy has a shield. Well, my guy has poison. So like it counteracts what's going on there. And something I noticed that was a little strange about the Bazaar is that it is a completely open field, but also the opponents that you're going against, you're not even like going against them in real time. You're going against a snapshot of their deck at the same period of time in which you are in at that moment.
Roughly, yeah.
So you will fight against somebody and then you'll never see them again.
Yeah, and so I think that can cause a lot of frustrations. We were talking earlier before recording this that like one particular thing that I run into is like if you end up doing like a shield build, for instance, in the Bazaar, and that's all you end up drafting, that's your go-to build, that's how you're going to end up getting there, is you're going to survive longer so that the sandstorm wipes out the other player before you get wiped out. If someone's going a poison build, poison goes past shield. And so that's technically just a hard counter. And I think that that's fine. But the problem I have with that is that like if I don't have any sort of an understanding of the fact that like I don't have control over that basically.
Right. There's no way for you to go, oh, I went up against this guy. He has poison. I should pivot to something that now beats poison so that I can beat that guy.
Which most other forms of drafting games have that, right? If you look at drafting Magic even, a lot of the times you can look and see like, well, someone else is picking red-black or whatever.
So I need to, I'm being cut off from my colors. I need to switch to something else.
Switch or pivot. And I also know if they're going red-black, if that archetype does this, maybe I should also draft a couple of these other cards that I know maybe are good against that or something like that as a side deck option. And so there's that option for counterplay. Here, you can't really be in control of counterplay. It's just about optimizing your plan to the best of your ability and knowing like, well, if I go shields, if I run into poison, I'm shit out of luck.
I'm just going to lose. Which does feel, I think, a little weird. Yeah. It's just in that there's not really any way to hedge against what other people are doing, so you're focused really just on your own optimization and optimizing the items that you get. The other concern I had with the game's sort of execution system, with it being able to make healing and shield builds, and then there's this sandstorm thing, and this is something I'm sure they can account for. But there's a possibility that because the sandstorm thing is coming in and doing damage effectively for free, your healing items and your shield items end up being that much better than investing in damage items because you're getting that sandstorm damage for free. So theoretically, if you can just last long enough, you can just kill your opponent without ever doing damage to them. So you end up in this weird asymmetry potentially where those healing items and things are massively outweighed by instead of doing damage to your opponent.
And I think that just will require careful balance. I don't see it as that much different than the concept of like decking out in Magic, right? Of like having that be sort of the long game of when the game's going to end. So it just has to be that if your build can kill the shield health build faster than, the sandstorm will get to you or whatever, then you win that. It's aggro versus econ,
Yeah, I think we start to get into like weird like turbo fog territory potentially though if they're not careful with it is kind of what I'm saying, where
if it's too easy to negate the damage that's
right
coming towards you.
And you're like, okay, well I'm gonna basically choose the path of literally non-interaction, even though the game's not really interactive anyway, but I'm gonna choose also in the battling that I'm not actually battling my opponent. I'm effectively ignoring them and then the game kills them for me. Right, which is just not particularly fulfilling. But I suppose, I don't know, there's a weirdness here with like I don't know. I guess it doesn't really much matter whether or not you're beating your opponent by healing yourself or whether you're dealing damage to them, because there's nothing that you can do at that point anyway. You're just watching it unfold.
Right. And I think that to continue the analysis, I think that I'm kind of viewing this more, I guess, on a negative side. But again, it's not necessarily that this is a bad thing, just that this is a quality of the game that it has, which is that I think that inherently its system, the way its combat works out, it's essentially a solved equation. They do have critical hits, but without, let's say you remove critical hits, basically the minute a match starts, you already know if you've won or lost. You just have to be able to calculate if that's happened. Right.
And like that's probably too complex for a human to do in a short amount of time. But I could see an add-on being added to the game that basically says your percentage chance to win this goes up as it's going on. Like,
well, and it's not even a percentage, right? Because
if there's crits, then it is sort of a percentage.
Then there's sort of a percentage, and some builds have crits in that way, but not every item crits.
Right. So then if you have none, then it literally is I start the game and we know immediately. Like nobody has any randomness. You just could know immediately who would win.
At the very least, crits wouldn't suddenly make it go from a 50% to a 60%. Basically, every build is probably going to hover around either 90% win or 10%.
Right. Yeah.
And there are items that have variance. There's items like there's slow items, freeze items, etc., that will hit a random item usually. And so that is where you get some of that variance and that possibility where, if I hit the right items at the right times, then maybe I'll win this. And I think those are good. Those are exciting because it makes it unknown, and it gives the possibility that you could hit really well and win. But systemically, it doesn't have that. And so there's plenty of builds I've had that I just know, like, okay, well, I'm not relying on this randomly pinging. I'm just dealing poison damage.
Well, then also over time, right? So it's basically relying on the only sort of randomness being injected as to whether or not a build is like optimal or not is the items that you get, right, as you're drafting.
Right.
And so
which is a good form of variance. It is
right,
a lot,
but the issue without those overlapping systems is that you effectively can know, okay, if my build is not to this point at this point in time,
you'll just lose.
I'm just done.
And
I should
behind.
just concede and start over.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. Like
I've felt that multiple times at this point where I couldn't get my build. In particular, too, there's in the middle during your hours, some of the events are that you'll fight monsters. And if you choose to fight a particular monster, there's usually like an easy to kill, average to kill, hard to kill. If you think, I think I could do the hard to kill one, and then you don't do it, you miss out on, you get an item from the monster and you get gold from the monster. And so suddenly now you are behind a significant amount of gold early on and an item that you could have sold for gold, or it could have been a really great item and you use it for some crazy random build or something. Now, obviously, that's your choice to push your luck in that way. But it sets you so far behind then, potentially, that, again, the variance of drafting, you could run into something that's exciting or whatever, and hopefully have enough money to buy it. But yeah, I do think that the skill of drafting is significantly higher than people expect it to be.
Right. Well, I do you're bringing up an interesting point, right? Because you're sort of hitting a gate, right? That says, okay, if I can kill this more powerful enemy, I'm assuming you have a choice, right? I think you have a choice of what enemy you're fighting. So you're like, okay, I could choose this more powerful one, or I could choose the weaker one. But if you get to that point and can't choose the more powerful one because you're like, I just know I'm going to lose, then you know that your build's not good enough already, right? You're like, okay, well, it's not good enough to beat that guy. I might as well start over and then just get to that first gate again until I can beat the more powerful enemy. And then if I can, then I'll keep going to the next gate, right? And that's all. I wouldn't say that's a strategic collapse, but it's close, right? Where you're not going to finish a whole run. I think as players optimize and optimize and optimize, you're going to get to that point where if I get to that first gate and I can't get the highest reward from that gate, another player that I would go up against has gotten that.
Right. I think it then depends on like how significant is that reward. And early on, the significance is if you lose, it's pretty significant. But if you just beat the easy to kill versus the hard to kill one, it's like 2 gold, 3 gold, and that's not a huge significant amount, and that's something that you could easily make up later.
Like the variance of items maybe can make up for that stuff. But I do wonder about, do we end up in that? Hopefully we don't end up in that optimization land where I'm just restarting a run. I guess if like you have to pay for the run or something, you're not going to do that, but it's just sort of ranked matches at this point, right? You lose rank maybe if you give up before the run's over.
I don't even think that's how it works. I think the rank, maybe you lose rank if you give up. I'm not actually sure because I never give up. But yeah, you pay a little bit of the in-game currency to do a ranked match, and then you get currency and items like skins when you play it.
They might have kind of an extrinsic motivating structure here that's like, well, if you finish a run, you'll end up better off than if you hadn't finished the run. Right. But I mean, if you're like in ranked matches and your goal is to rank up, and if you keep losing matches, I don't know if you're going to keep going. I guess I also wonder,
is it a problem if people drop out? Because if people decide to drop out of their own decision, like that's not affecting the draft pool, like it would in other games.
Well, yeah. Not really. You might just homogenize builds the further up the chain you go.
Right. It might just be, I didn't get this build, so I'm going to
restart, get the best build. And then and that's the thing we can, there's no like individual counterplay in like, I see my opponent is doing this, but there is a meta counterplay, right? Like,
you'll know like,
poison
this is the best build if I get these items.
Like poison builds are really good right now, so I'm going to go do something that counters poison, or, shield builds, healing builds are really good. I'm going to get poison, that kind of stuff. Yeah. Cool. Okay. So let's talk about takeaways and kind of wrap up with our final thoughts.
I would not be surprised if this game does pretty well. I don't think it's going to be gangbusters. I don't think it's going to be beating out any AAA competitors, but I think that this game is going to do pretty well for itself. I think, overall, I think Reynad and the Tempo team and stuff did a really great job. And I think that it really shows that the success of it so far, with honestly, like, as far as I can tell, a minor form of marketing, like actual marketing, like spend. Like, I'm not seeing ads for this. I'm not seeing, it all just seems to be streamers. Yeah. And streamers that are, based off of what I'm seeing, not paid sponsorships or anything.
The streaming is what Reynad knows. It makes a certain amount of sense that, he's known in the space. He knows streamers. He knows the game.
Yeah. I think this is a game that a lot of people are interested in, though. And I think that this is probably the first time that, we've seen in the indie space, there's a lot of different games that have been talked about lately, Backpack Battles being one of the ones that a lot of people compare the Bazaar to. And I think that there's a untapped audience of people that want to see not just this as like a sort of smaller side game that some AAA companies are working on, like, you know, looking at like something like Team Fight Tactics. You can even see other games that tried something like this, like Storybook Brawl, which is not a thing anymore, unfortunately, that also saw some success doing this. I think the genre of auto battlers, there's a lot of people that want one and want it at a polished state.
Well, I think that like the genre in general is particularly interesting. First, I want to say like this is an immense effort that Tempo Storm.
I think just Tempo.
I don't remember if that's like the name of the company or that was his like streaming thing. Raynad and crew.
Raynad and crew.
This is an immense effort to be their first game. Like this is a very high bar that they've cleared. And you know, it's exciting to see people move into the space. I feel like this is solidly AA, which is not something that we've been seeing a ton of recently. There's been a big gap between indie and AAA. And so that's exciting to see. I think that the genre itself is an interesting evolution of strategy games in general that takes some of the I tend to call it like performance anxiety. Yeah. It takes some of the performance anxiety away when like you can optimize and do these things. I said that really loud. Optimize and do things behind sort of like the behind the scenes, and then when you go to present what you're doing, you just sort of watch it unfold. And the person isn't even there, so there's no like, you know, making fun of anybody or like feeling that performance anxiety.
I was comparing this earlier to like playing like old MySpace games or like web browser games.
Right, some of the evolution of those.
Yeah, which is wild because a lot of those just sort of fell to a lot of, you know, other people trying to make a little bit more active games or compete with AAA games and stuff. And this sort of smaller web browser casual experience of I'm going to hop in and put time in when I want to play this game, and sort of, like you said, let it do its own thing, you know, Farmville-esque or whatever. Not that this is like Farmville, but I feel like it's a close comparison. And like, I'm deciding now to invest time in this game, but I could leave it alone and it's fine, right? And just come back to it whenever I feel like. I think that there's definitely a lot of people that are interested in that genre.
Yeah, I think there's also room for something that's like more long-term optimization. Like Stardew Valley kind of works this way, right? Where like your farm is constantly evolving and being optimized. I mean, if that's the direction you want to go in that game, that's a whole nother story. But you know, maybe there's room here for a game that's more long-term like that versus the way that Bazaar works and just, you know, small runs. What else? Oh, and I think ultimately this is a game that's made by a streamer for streaming. I think it's very keyed in on the flow of conversation that streamers go through in terms of like, all right, we're focused on the game right now and we're talking about here's the strategic picks I'm making. I'm discussing it with chat, and then we go play the game, and now we're just watching it unfold, and me and chat are reacting to what's happening in those moments, and then we repeat the cycle. And I think that's pretty masterful in terms of how to integrate game design with sort of the streaming culture.
Yeah. I think being able to remove, I think it's funny because I really do think that the closest comparison to a game like this is something like Super Auto Pets. But Super Auto Pets has such a like casual marketing to it, where it's like it's not crudely drawn art, but it's very simple art, and it's a very silly, simple premise. So it feels like it's this casual thing, and this feels like almost as if a AAA company were to grab that and be like, "Well, no, you come play our very, very polished version of something like this." The thing that I think was really successful about that game in comparison to other auto battlers around the time when Underlords was getting big and Teamfight Tactics and all that stuff was everyone was having it be this lobby with a timer. This being this unlimited time means that, you know, you could have a streamer like Asmongold that goes and talks for 20 minutes or whatever, not that he's playing this, but he could just go on a rant, right? And milk as much content as they want out of this one decision.
The game's still waiting there for you to return back to what you were doing.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's the very streamer focused.
Yeah.
Which probably ends up being pretty friendly to mobile and casual play in general.
Yeah. I would not be surprised if a mobile version of this came out and did pretty decently as well.
Yep. So that's the Bazaar.
As the Bazaar. Go check it out. It's in closed beta. is not an ad, but if it's something that sounds
it's
cool
like
to you.
open beta at this point because you can like if you buy the game, you get into the beta.
I guess I don't know if that means closed or open.
It's open.
Okay.
Closed means invite
it's
only.
Open beta with a paywall.
Yeah, I mean
Yes.
it's early access. I guess I don't know. It's
Right.
somewhere in the space. Go check it out if it seems interesting. And yeah, we'll catch you in the bye.
Yeah.